Good afternoon. My name is Jada, and today I'm going to present an in-depth analysis of the author Stephen King. Part 1 of this investigation will be about his background, covering his personality, where he's from, and his family life. Part 2 consists of an in-detail look at his works, and Part 3 will cover interesting fun facts. I'm here with my laptop, so if you see me looking down a lot, I'm looking at my notes. Let's begin. Part 1, his background. Stephen Edwin King was born in Portland, Maine in 1947. He was the second son of Donald and Nellie Ruth Pillsbury King. Ruth was told that she could not give birth to a child, so Ruth and Donald both adopted a son named David. Stephen was the couple's first biological child, who was the younger brother of David, their adopted child. In 1950, when Stephen was nearly 3, Donald walked out of the family's lives forever. This changed the routine of the family, but not the heart of it. Ruth took up 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet, and this would often mean that she didn't have enough money for a babysitter, so she would leave David and Stephen at home alone. Stephen was 2 and David was 3, so 2 young children at home, what were they to do? They took care of each other by reading to each other. This family was a reading-based family. They would read all the time. So David and Stephen would read to each other when they're at home alone. They would read comic books and anything that they could find. Stephen's favorites were horror comic books such like Dracula and Frankenstein. So I found this book that is similar to what Stephen would have read in the 1950s when he was a young boy. It is the similar style and it has similar content as to what he would have liked to read. It's this book by Neil Gaiman called The Sandman. This is the first volume. It's called Preludes and Nocturnes. And you can see in this book it is similar style, content, especially in the drawings of how comic books would have looked in the 1950s. Something like this Stephen would have read when he was 2, 3, or 4. This book actually looks like a really good comic book. And you can tell the horror aspect of it, especially in this page. Thriller, suspense, you can see all of this going on. When Stephen was about 11, Ruth's parents became bedridden due to their older age. Ruth's sisters persuaded Ruth to leave her home and to move closer to her parents so she can take care of them. Ruth was given a house, financial assistance, and she was paid in clothes and groceries. Ruth would often work a part-time job for some extra income. Stephen went to grammar school at Durham and then Lisbon Falls High School, graduating in 1966. He graduated from the University of Maine at Orono in 1970 with a bachelor's in English and was qualified to teach at the high school level. During college, Stephen was very adamant about the anti-Vietnam War effort. His protest was voiced in his regular column, King's Garbage Truck, in the school newspaper. His freshman year of college, he received his first short story sale on the glass floor, which was published in Startling Mystery Stories in 1967. During college, he met a woman named Tabitha Spruce, who was the third of 8 children, and fell in love. Their first child, a girl named Naomi, was born June 1st, 1970. In January of 1971, the couple married. After graduation, they moved into a trailer into the town of Herman. In 1971, Stephen accepted the job of an English teacher at Hampton Academy, where he earned about $4,600 a year. All throughout his jobs in the evenings, with whatever time he had left after taking care of his children and after working, he would spend at the typewriter. The couple's second child, a boy named Joseph, was born June 4th, 1972. Stephen began writing a novel about Carrie Anna White, a teenage girl with supernatural powers. He believed that he didn't know enough about teenage girls to fully write the story, so he trashed it. Tabitha then found the manuscript and urged Stephen to finish it. Stephen finished the manuscript and sent it to an editor at Doubleday Publishing, Bill Thompson. Doubleday accepted the manuscript named Carrie for publishing in the spring of 1973. Even though Stephen received a check for $2,500, he did not give up teaching. He knew that writing could not be full-time yet, so he did not quit his job at Hampton Academy. Soon another paperback publishing company bought the rights for Carrie, and Stephen and his publishers each received checks of $200,000. Stephen then gave up teaching.
I think their first offer was either $200,000 or $250,000 for the paperback rights on this. Well, this just blew us all out of the water. And Bob Banker, who was our subsidiary rights man, great poker player, Well, actually, we were looking for more than that.
And I say to Bill, how much? And he said, 6 figures, $400,000. The phone was on the wall in the kitchen, and all the strength ran out of my legs, and I just kind of slid down the wall. I can remember my shirt tail coming out of my pants until my butt was on the linoleum.
Even with all the success, Stephen still had a sad note in his life. His mother died of lung cancer at the age of 59. She never got to see the book. His next book, originally titled Second Coming, and then Jerusalem's Lot, and finally Salem's Lot, was his next novel after Carrie. Carrie was published in the spring of 1974. That same fall, the Kings left Maine for Boulder, Colorado. They lived there for less than a year, in which Stephen then wrote The Shining, which is also set in Colorado. Returning to Maine in the summer of 1975, the Kings purchased a home in the Lakes region of western Maine. At that house, Stephen finished writing The Stand, much of which is also set in Colorado. Stephen was finally a well-known writer who was churning out books every year, and almost every book was optioned for a movie. The Kings have 3 children, Naomi Rachel, Joe Hill, and Owen Phillip, who was born February 21st, 1977. Stephen's personality was very perseverant. He learned this from watching his mother work 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet. Stephen was not the person to try but to do. During elementary school, he and David made a school newspaper in which they wrote their own columns. Now we're on to part 2, his works. Stephen has over 50 published novels, in which I will list in the next scene. Some of his most famous works are the ones you already know, which is like Carrie, about the teenage girl with supernatural powers, The Shining, which is set in Boulder, Colorado, in which you can witness Jack Torrance going insane, Cujo, which is about a rabid dog that goes around eating people, Pet Sematary, It, which is about that clown that comes from the sewer who starts killing people, Misery, which is a novel about an author getting kidnapped by his biggest fan, who is being held captive and is being tortured until he writes another novel. And possibly you might know the Dark Tower series. Stephen has not just written novels, he has also taken part in TV shows. He was a part of Under the Dome, Dead Zone, Nightmares and Dreamscapes, and Kingdom Hospital. Stephen has also written multiple screenplays, like The Shawshank Redemption, which is like when Morgan Freeman talks about this new guy who comes in, and he's like, I never knew that Billy was going to be such a cool guy, but then I got used to him, or something like that. Stephen King has won a plethora of awards, in which I will list in the next scene. Now I'd like to point out how many Lifetime Achievement Awards he has won. Stephen King started publishing in early 1970 and he is still publishing today, so that's about 40 years worth of publishing novels. He has won at least 10 Lifetime Achievement Awards, including the Horror Writers Association Award in 2002 for Lifetime Achievement, the International Horror Guild Award in 2003 for Living Legends, the Mystery Writers of America Award in 2007 for The Grand Master, and the World Fantasy Award in 2004 for Lifetime Achievement. What made Stephen King famous was the depth of suspense and horror in his novels. What also made Stephen King famous was the fact that he could reach to 2 audiences. I mean 2 audiences when I say the audience that goes into the bookstore and the audience that sits down and watches the movie. So by the fact that Stephen King had both the novel and the movie, and the fact that Stephen King had both the novel and the movie, he was tailoring to 2 audiences and creating an even greater fan base. So when Carrie came out, he had the bookstores, he had the novels, he had the people who read. And then when the movie came out, he now had this whole nother crowd, merged them together. It's a double line of fans. Another thing that made Stephen King famous was that after Carrie, all of his novels became #1 bestsellers and were optioned for movies. I'm going to go in depth on the book/movie The Shining, which was written by Stephen King. The novel The Shining is set in Boulder, Colorado in the middle of the winter, in which Jack Torrance, who is played by Jack Nicholson, he accepts the job of an overseer, like caretaker of the Overlook Hotel. And he was told by, so I'm going to go in depth on the novel The Shining, on the novel and the movie of The Shining, which was written by Stephen King. So The Shining is set in Boulder, Colorado, and it follows the story of Jack Torrance, who is played by Jack Nicholson, and his family. Jack Torrance takes the job of an overseer caretaker of the Overlook Hotel in the middle of the winter. It follows the family, and it shows how this hotel is something more than a hotel. It has the presence of evil spirits and the supernatural in this hotel. Like, it is crazy. And these evil presences push the father, which is Jack Torrance, into complete insanity and violence, in which he starts killing people and sees those two twin girls in the middle of the hallway, where they're like, come on, let's go play. As I said, Jack Torrance is played by Jack Nicholson. Wendy Torrance, which is Jack Torrance's wife, is played by Shelley Duvall. And Danny Torrance, which is the couple's son, is played by Danny Lloyd. Danny Lloyd is the same little boy from the Chucky movies, so like if you don't know what I'm talking about and you've seen Chucky, that's the same little boy. To add some pizzazz, I'll show you the original trailer for The Shining. There was 2 trailers that I could have showed you, and one was the unreleased trailer and the other was the original trailer. I decided to show the original trailer because it portrayed more of what the public saw and thought of Stephen King's work. So as you saw, it is very basic. It is a completely basic commercial until you get to the end, where like the blood starts coming out of the elevator and the blood like washes over the camera, gets all on the shot, but then it's really basic up until there. Soon you start to hear that music in the background. It starts coming out at you. It starts popping. You really start to notice it because everything else is basic but this music. What the music reminded me of, it was like bees buzzing to the point of which they're about to do something, like something is about to go down. And you also hear how it has its gradual climb into a near like heart-pounding blistering sound. This is how the public thought of Stephen King's writing. They thought that it was a gradual climb when like this book started off. It was just regular, this family had to take this job because this dude is a struggling teacher and he's an alcoholic and he's getting fired and issues going bad, so that they get this job. They think it's about to be a vacation for the winter and it seems like it's all going good, and then you watch this struggle You watch Jack Torrance struggle with his sanity, and you can see him going insane. That is why I chose the original trailer over the unreleased trailer. Stephen King actually did not like the movie version as much as he could have, because the director, he mostly portrayed the insanity of Jack and Jack going around killing everybody, rather than the main point of the novel, which is the deterioration of the family, which is Wendy, Jack, and Danny. But Stephen King did like the portrayal of Carrie in the Carrie movie. He thought that it was a very good reenactment of his novel. And finally, part 3, the interesting fun facts. So I'll start with the goofy things, the weird things that made Stephen King Stephen King. So Stephen King was afraid of a lot of things. He was afraid of the dark. He was afraid of the number 13. Stephen King was afraid of the number 13 so much that he never stopped reading a book on page 13 or page 94 or page 103 or page 209. Or on page 211. He was afraid of closed spaces. He was also afraid of bats. Eventually he moves into a house that was like filled with bats. And all these fears are really weird, seeing that he wrote so many horror novels, but it makes sense how the depth of the fear and suspense in the novels, because he had so many fears himself, so he could portray it easily. So, more fun facts. Stephen King had a part-time job in high school as a gravedigger, which inspired the story he wrote, I Was a Teenage Grave Robber. Stephen King couldn't remember many novels he wrote in the 80s due to his extreme alcoholism, including novels like Cujo and the Tommyknockers. Stephen King wrote a novel called Rage, which was released with the pseudonym of Richard Bachman. Rage was about a disturbed high school student who held his classmates at gunpoint. After Jeffrey Lynn Cox, a disturbed high school student held his classmates hostage, was found out to have read and been inspired by the book Rage, King let Rage fall out of print in the US. And lastly, Ronald McDonald was one of the inspirations for Pennywise in the novel It. So I looked up pictures of Ronald McDonald and Pennywise from It. Pennywise is the clown from the movie It, the one that comes out of the sewers and starts killing people. And I put 2 pictures of them together and they look hecka alike. Like, they have the same red hair. I mean, that's a clown thing, but still, they look way too alike. So as this analysis of the author Stephen King comes to a close, I'd like to thank you for listening to my investigation of the most successful horror writers of our time. Thank you.